Hello. Okay. Welcome everybody. First, I want to give another. Everyone can give a round of applause to Ruth Cohen. She really had this idea, ran with it, put together an incredible panel of strong, intelligent, gifted women, and I'm excited to be here today with all of you. She's a program manager at JOFA. She's always looking for new ideas and programs, and she's just a great person to know, professionally and personally. So, Ruth at JOFA.org. Be her friend. Okay. Thank you all for being here. And as I said, we have this incredible lineup of panelists, and I should add that JOFA became interested, or I became very interested in this topic. I was asked to speak on a panel, was it like 2 years ago? And I was horrified when I thought I was going to be on a panel, and then I found out that I was going to be speaking for 45 minutes. So I needed to get some information because I didn't have 45 minutes worth of material. And I posted on Facebook, when you hear the language of shit after crisis is the Jew language for the crisis of people, that we have too many people who are single in the community, which I find deeply offensive. That's what I was supposed to speak about. So I posted, when you hear the language of shit of crisis, what comes to mind? Please share the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there was a lot of ugly. And as a result of that, we embarked on a year of parlor meetings, writings, the JOFA journal, which you see over here, and there's a lot of wisdom, and there's a lot to learn from various types of faith communities, and that's why I'm just so excited that we're here today. So what I'm going to do is briefly introduce our panelists. There are many, many accolades that I can share about our panelists, but we want to hear from them and not from me. So we have Khristi Lauren Adams, a Baptist pastor and chaplain and author of the book, which is for sale on Amazon.
Yeah, and here.
And here, get it tonight. The Misinterpreted Gospel of Singleness, a cultural critique of myths surrounding singleness in the Christian community. We have Sharon Harris, an academic who has done extensive research on singles boards in the LDS Church. We have Tayyaba Bukhari, who works for a women's nonprofit, but is also the CDO of MALIKAH, which I'm sure we'll hear about. And Rabbi Abigail Sosland, Morah Ruchanit, spiritual advisor of Schechter Westchester High School. So what I'm going to start with is asking all of our panelists, and we could go down, we'll nip the order whenever you guys want, briefly telling us about yourself, perhaps why you're here on this panel, and a brief overview of marriage pressure and experience of singles in your particular faith community. Choose her. Microphone.
Hi. Can you hear me? My name is Abby Sosland. I am a child of the conservative movement of the Jewish community, which means that if you're an insider in the Jewish world, you would know the names of all the things I've attended. I went to Solomon Schechter schools growing up. I went to Ramah Camp. I went to USY. I'm the daughter of a rabbi. So I'm an insider in many, many ways in the Jewish community. I grew up as an insider, and yet, as someone who didn't get married till I was 48, I was often made to feel like an outsider. And as someone who went to all of those institutions and grew up like really in the community, felt like an outsider, I can only imagine what other people have felt, and I've spoken to a lot of those people. So I've kind of made this my thing, and that's why I'm on the panel.
Hi everyone. I am working both professionally and in my personal aspect on both for Muslim women within the Middle East and Asia, as well as just about singlehood and what feminism means, as well as deconstructing what a single parent home looks like. I am the youngest of 4 daughters, as a single parent. We come from a very strong Muslim household. And that's something that I do also professionally now, leading as the Chief Development Officer of MALIKAH, which means Queen, Princess in 8 languages. And we do work with all women femmes in deconstructing what power looks like and empowering them in all aspects. So I'm excited to be here and share my experiences.
Hi, I'm Sharon. I was born and raised Mormon, or LDS, both work And kind of like Abby, I've been to all the insider things for Mormonism. I went to BYU, Brigham Young University, it's the church-owned school. I went on a proselytizing mission. I'm sure you've seen the people with the name tags. I did that in Brazil. I came back expecting that I would finish my degree and get married. And 2 degrees and 4 or 5 jobs later, I found myself another breakup that wasn't working, and in my mid-30s. And so I had the opportunity to research singles wards. Congregations in the LDS community are called wards. And so I had the opportunity to research singles wards and how they got started and what their purpose was, kind of the institutional history of that organization for the Mormon Church. And in the course of putting that together, I actually ended up getting married, which is a funny story, but, and so my husband's here, and thank you. So that's why I'm here, but I like Abby, have really felt the pressure on singles in the LDS community. It's considered that you cannot get to the highest realm of heaven in Mormon doctrine without being married. So that puts quite a bit of pressure on, and I can see how that can make people feel ostracized or stigmatized if they're not married. And I think it's really important to champion our single co-religionists.
Hi, my name is Khristi, and I'm from New Jersey. And I did write this book. I didn't set out to write a book on singleness. I set out to write a book about myself and things that I had struggled with. And then there was this consistent theme that I found, which was kind of responding to negative culture around singleness. And so that was why I wrote it. And then from that point on, I realized that there is a marginalized group within a lot of churches in the Christian community, and that is like singles are on the outskirts, and those that are married are in the center. And it's a contradictory message because there's a message around family and togetherness, but there's a behavior that stigmatizes and says that there's a deadline, or if you're not a part of this particular exclusive group, then you're not a part of the fold, which is really antithetical to the Christian message. So that was really how I got started.
Thank you so much. So one thing in general I think is quite powerful are hearing stories or anecdotes in terms of helping people understand the gravity. Wow, gotta be louder than that crowd. I'm wondering if you could share a story or anecdote that sort of typifies that sort of somehow is a succinct way of explaining what the problem is or what the reality is.
I always start off with this story about I worked at a college called Azusa Pacific University in California, and counseled quite a few students, and there was a senior who came into my office, a young woman, and was miserable, depressed, just I really wanted to was thinking that she was a threat to herself almost, and she was about to graduate. She was an engineering major, she had a job on the line, a really supportive family and great friends. But she said, I'm not engaged, and it's March, and graduation is in May, and I don't have my ring by spring, which was this kind of culture there was that I had never heard of at Christian universities. And I realized that there were so many senior women that were just depressed, and it didn't matter how much value that they had from the outside, seeing them. There was a message, and a lot of them were like 19, 20, they were even on the younger end. And so I think that for me really highlights a problem, even though that kind of sentiment is kind of mainly within kind of Christian colleges. I think it's a sentiment across the board. And that Tracy Ellis Ross put it best. She was doing this speech for Glamour magazine, and in it she had said, gosh, I have an Emmy, and I have a hit show, and all of these things. And she's like, and yet people still come up to me, and they're like, when are you getting married? How come you're not married? And she's like, I have an Emmy, And so I think that therein kind of lies the problem, especially for women, particularly for women, that it doesn't matter what you do or how much you accomplish, that you are lacking completeness without this other person or spouse in tow.
Well, I'll tell a story, and to make it make sense, I have to explain that there are singles wards, these congregations, in the Mormon community. And so if you are single, you have the option to go there. It's supposed to be optional, and it is technically, except that means that most of the singles are there, and so you run the risk of feeling even more on the outskirts if you stay in a conventional congregation. So I was in singles wards for many years, and there was a period where I was a middle school teacher, choir teacher, and I had the summers off, and I knew that they were putting together all of the help and positions in local Mormon leadership is volunteer. And so I knew that they were putting together youth camps, and I knew some of the students that were going, and I just thought, well, I know these students, I've got some time, maybe they could use some help. And I went to the organizer and said, I'm available. I'd be happy to help out, which it's not everybody that volunteers to just go for a week of youth camp. And I thought they would be excited about it. And she said, oh, you know what, we're fine. You just stay in the singles ward and date. That'll be fine. And I thought,
And date.
And yeah, but my job, I couldn't be bothered to take the time to give to the community in that way. It was more important that I do whatever they do in the singles ward.
Might be a role model for those.
Right, exactly. I thought this is a good opportunity for the youth there to see somebody who's participating in accomplished and professional. And anyway, so that's just a nice little example.
I would say, coming from a Muslim household and community, I think that often the religion gets brushed with a wide stroke in terms of understanding the layers of identities that come within these communities. It's a religion of 1.5 billion across 49 nations. Within America specifically, there's about 3.5 American Muslims, 2.2 that are adults, and just about 52% that are married. And so I find it very interesting navigating these conversations, not as a woman, but a first-generation American, Central Asian descent. So it's the reality, the problem that I see is this hyphen that we have as Americans, as women, as Muslims, and navigating that space, that niche that we have, and then along with being single. And so within Islam, religion, marriage is quite highly recommended and encouraged. Getting married is completing half of your deen, half of your religion, and so you do attain more closeness to God and your spirituality in that sense. So it's very highly encouraged and an attractive thing to do. But then the reality of it is that it's your choice. What do you want to gain from it? And how do you want to pursue that? And I think, speaking as a first-generation American, that's something I know I and many my siblings, a lot of my peers do kind of navigate in that conversation in terms of, well, how much of it is my choice? What kind of person do I want to marry? And who also will be good for my family and my community? So it's really balancing identities, which is very tricky. I think that as a transitional generation, it's something that we're still learning. And I find it really interesting in terms of how we can move forward in providing spaces of dialogue. And spaces of nurture versus creating more social stigma against single women. So I really definitely want to nurture that conversation a bit more.
I'm getting a stomachache listening to these stories because I really identified with a lot of them. And now I got married about 10 months ago, and I forget that I'm on the other side. But I still have this deep internalized shame that I carried for decades about being single, and am I allowed to date this person, and what if I'm not interested in marriage? I mean, never even allowing myself to think that I'm not interested in marriage because, the thing I heard about better date, don't waste a minute, you have free time, date. But I would say the biggest part of this for me is that shame that I hear. I've been talking about this now for a while. I did not start talking about it until a few years ago, just before, by the way, I met my husband, I started saying, like, this isn't okay. Things like, I'm in a very, very loving group of professionals that we meet once a year. I happen to be in it with Sharon. And every year they do good and welfare. And people get up, oh, you know, my kid's this, I just got married, my child got married. And it's like, okay, what is my good and welfare? It's sort of like Tracy Ellis Ross, like, okay, I guess none of that counted. And so just that kind of experience was really painful. I couldn't even name it until I was in my early 40s. So I would say that. I think in general, things I've heard and also felt is just, you know, the Sabbath table is a big part of Jewish culture. I was not invited often. It turns out I don't want to be invited anymore because I've come to understand that, like, I don't like the dynamic of the Sabbath table for a lot of reasons, and a lot of it has to do with the demographics. Now that I am married, I hear people often say to me, well, now it's different for you. Because I think that a lot of people sort of like get married or have a child or the thing that they wanted, and then they close the door and slam it and never look back. And I just feel like this stuff really makes me a little sick. And then the one other story which I shared with you guys when we spoke before, which I just think is important, is that I was ordained, I'm in a different sort of community than Sharon. I was ordained 20-something years ago. And when I was ordained, the single women who were becoming rabbis were seen as threats. I was told, you know, a number of times in my negotiations with my first synagogue, you don't need that much money, you're single, you'll be fine. Like, just a number of things. And the women who were attached were safer somehow to hire. There's so much more to say. I have often felt that, you know, it was, and this obviously I can't speak for other communities that feel marginalized. However, I have been envious of my LGBT friends because they could sort of take space up and say, hey, why aren't you guys listening to us? And I felt like, why would I ever take space up in that way? So, you know, not to compare, and I know each, you know, community feels its own thing in its own way, but I've always wished, like, I could say, you know, you could be LGBT and proud. Am I allowed to be single and proud? You know, because I'm not. I'm so embarrassed. You know, so there was always that feeling.
So that's a great way to segue into the next question, which is one thing when I called it research, even though it was really crowdsourcing on Facebook, but I was only getting feedback about heteronormative community, from the heteronormative community, and primarily from women. I got maybe like 5 anecdotes from men, but honestly, I could have published a 2-volume book with the amount of information stories that people sent me within 24 to 48 hours. And I did try to get some sort of feedback from the LGBTQ community, and I didn't really get any. And I posted a number of Facebook groups, and I'm wondering if there's anything you could speak to about that singlehood outside of the heteronormative community, and if there's anything that you might want to share.
I'll go. So this is a really big question for the Mormon community because the marriage that is the kind that's supposed to get you to heaven does not include same-sex marriage, right? And so there's this encouragement in many areas of the church community that if you are LGBTQ, that you not act on those on that orientation, and you remain single in many respects in order to stay a faithful orthopraxic member of the community. And I think it's actually harder, as difficult as I felt my years of singlehood to be. I always knew that at least there was a chance that I might meet somebody, and that position would change. And if you want to be faithful Mormon currently, you have to kind of give up the hope that you can be in a committed relationship and act on your orientation. So that that's a really difficult thing. I've seen lots of people try to do this in really courageous ways. Various friends who are gay or bi or whatever, and enter into relationships, but try to still be a part of the community as much as they can. Make space for each other. I've seen certainly a lot of allies trying to make space for them. I've seen plenty of people say, I can't do both, and they leave for a while, but still have a lot of affection for the Mormon community. I have a friend who decided she always wanted to be a mom. She came out as lesbian just a few months before the church decided that it would not baptize children of same-sex couples, which was a really difficult position, and that was just a couple of years ago. And she had this suddenly, just months after she came out, this issue that she had to look at and decide what to do about. She decided to see a doctor and be artificially inseminated and had a pregnancy anyway, and now she's got a beautiful daughter, and she's a single parent as lesbian. And she's trying to straddle this position of doing what the church asked while still having her own orientation and her own dreams of being a mom. So it puts people in a really difficult position.
So one thing I will say with the heteronormative community within the Christian community is that there's this sort of like, because there's a pressure to get married, there's a date to marry, right? You're on your first date and you're thinking, could this be my husband or could this be my wife? And that kind of takes away from things, right? I think with the LGBTQ community, because they haven't been as accepted within that narrative, they sort of kind of created their own, right? And because of that, there has been, I don't want to say less pressure, but more of a kind of understanding of partnership, right? I don't see a lot of, at least my friends jumping into marriage as much. And so one thing I'll say that I've learned from my community is more so, when you're dating, there's this sense, like I said, of I want to get to know this person may be my partner. They're not even necessarily thinking off the bat, could this be my husband, could this be my wife, because that's not a part of that narrative per se, right? So I feel like there has been a reclaiming in that, and then I think within that there is a kind of newfound spirituality, and then a closeness with God as they get closer to each other. So I will say, just on my end, that's what I've learned.
You can opt in or pass too.
I could comment, but I think you want me to, do you want everyone?
I want you to do.
I'll say this. I'll say this. I can't speak to the experience, but I can say this. Loneliness is universal. Shame is universal. And those are experiences that we as religious people can help to alleviate, right? So I feel like, I think it's nice to have a name, right? So if you are able to come out as gay, or I think somehow you're working with a set of shame and family and communal stuff that I can't totally understand, or, but having a name to something you're feeling is helpful. That's why this is helpful, right? And I always wanted a name for what, obviously there's so much else going on in here, but one name was like, oh, no, this isn't like a shame thing, right? And so that's where the Venn diagram means.
Thank you. Okay, so my next question is about, which you may or may not feel qualified to answer, but this is an all-woman panel. There's lots of all-men panels working on that. So we're going to go to the extreme here with all women. But if you want or are able to comment on if there's a difference or disparity between the way that single men versus single women are treated, or specific obstacles that sort of differ based on their sex.
Okay, I'll start.
Besides the pay gap, yeah.
Yeah. I would say, culturally speaking, there's often a lot of overlap. I think in a lot of faith-based communities, you can tell. There's women's biological clock, there's her natural aging, there's a sense of rush that she has to have children, and obviously, traditionally speaking, she has to be married before then. And I would say, Islamically speaking, there are some man-made barriers in terms of men and women getting married. So there's this double standards of, well, if a man in his late 20s or 30s within that age range is not married, it's more he's setting up his financial stability, he's being accomplished. And it's quite admired. It's quite, pat on the back, hey, he's doing this great job. Versus a woman who's doing the exact same thing, it's more like, well, what else are you doing? So just personally speaking from my background and very similar stories that I've been through, that I've heard, are once you graduated, whether it's your undergraduate, your graduate, PhD, it's more like, this is just the natural step for you to get married. And so it's this thing of cultural stigma and just barriers in terms of what is expected domestically of women versus what is expected of men within the community. And it's a lot of this, which I find interesting, is that it's not religiously based, it's culturally based, and it's also based within household structures. So I often see this complete double standard of portrayal within the community of also welcoming men that are not married within spaces that women are not included in. And that's definitely something I think moving forward that we need to be a lot more socially conscious of, because these barriers often take us away from our spirituality level, when that's not those barriers built upon the concrete. It's really man-made barriers that I think have to be deconstructed quite quickly.
Okay. I mean, two things. Number one, in the whole society, this is the George Clooney, Jennifer Aniston problem, right? That George Clooney was a player and he kept breaking hearts and he wasn't ready to settle down, but Jennifer Aniston kept getting her heart broken, and poor thing, right? So it's that, and I feel that certainly in the Jewish community, I imagine it's everywhere that they're not Jews. And this numbers game is a big thing. Oh, there's so many, I know so many wonderful women, right? That was always said to me, and I think that I think that's true in other communities, but certainly in the Jewish community, it makes it feel that.
Sure, there was actually a piece in Time magazine about this, about the Mormon community, the Jewish community, how there's this disparity where you have more single women than men. It is a numbers game, and it has to do with the dropout rate of the Mormon community when the men tend to drop out when they're going to Brazil or cool places, and within the Orthodox community, the men tend to marry younger women, and then
It's like,
whoever knows demographics well knows that doesn't pan out well percentage-wise.
I don't think that the men are as panicked. I don't think they feel as competitive. I think they feel like they have their pick. I think it leads to a candy store mentality. And the truth is, as we know, real relationships are built on two people. You don't really need a huge number of people to choose from, right? And so that whole numbers game is one of those things that gets thrown around to add pressure, in my opinion, right? Who cares? Yes, there are more women actually in competition with other women, right? If I'm a religious person, I actually believe that my path is my path, so thanks anyway, right? And I feel that's really important.
All of these things are applied in my community as well. I do want to kind of put a plug in for men have it rough in the Mormon church. There's a famous quote that gets bandied about, misquoted, from Brigham Young, who was Joseph Smith's successor, that a man over the age of fill in the blank, sometimes 25, 26, 27, whatever, is a menace to society if he's not married. And so there's this kind of idea that you're really messing up if you haven't pulled this together, and also that the man is supposed to initiate a lot of the courtship process. And so if he's not doing it, then he's just slacking. if she's not doing it, then oh, poor thing, kind of like you said. That being said, I mean, there's plenty of problems both directions. I'm not, but the attrition rate is enormous for men. So a friend and colleague did some research among singles and found that of those, well, first of all, if you're a Mormon single man, you generally are not asked to take on these volunteer callings. You're not given the kind of responsibility that you would be otherwise. And so you have less and less to contribute to the community and become more and more of an outlier and kind of forgotten. And so they found that the activity rate in the church for married women who had, for married women was 64% who were somewhat regularly active participants in the church. For single women, it was 17%. Now, I don't know what it was for married men, but for single men, it was 8%. And it just bottoms out because they're not given the kind of, they're not given priesthood advancement the way that, I mean, they might hold an office of priest, but they're not given these roles that a married man would have.
I'd literally be repeating.
I have one more thing to say about that, just real quick, super quick. My husband is an EMT, and he was single. He got married at 57, and he was not permitted to be part of the religious Hatzalah ambulance corps because no single men are allowed to participate because they're seen as a threat to patients. Whereas married men, I guess, would never do anything inappropriate. So that was painful for him.
Yes, women aren't allowed to know, so
That's true.
Okay. There's so many great things to talk about. My next question is, so there's been a lot of conversation in the general American, media and what have you about how the demographics of North American society are changing, that there are more and more single people, and what that means, and a lack of shame. And I don't know, I'm sure everyone understands Rebecca Traster's blog. So, oh my gosh, Rebecca Traster, I think it's called All the Single Ladies.
Oh, okay.
Beyonce. And it's a strong work about how society is changing and how it's changing our working structure and our social structures and everything. So this question is, this particular panel, we're all coming from faith communities. So I'm curious to know what you think is different about being in a faith community versus the general societal pressures. If there is a difference, if there's not, maybe there are some, bonuses by being a part of the faith community, making it somewhat easier.
So, two things. So when you're saying there's more single people, interesting because I keep using the word narrative. The narrative ones are that's not part of the narrative. The narrative still is that marriage equals complete whole closer to God, right? It's kind of like I've been reading a lot about Generation Z, and it's like they're going to be the most diverse generation. And I'm like, so interesting, because the narrative is white supremacy, right? The narrative is that racism is driving our nation when it could just be a small few that's driving the narrative if we're going to be, the most diverse nation, right? So, but I think the single people have a responsibility if we are kind of outnumbering to speak out more, right? But because of that shame, there's a quietness, so we allow the dominant narrative to continue to pervade. Sometimes I don't see a difference between my, not necessarily local church community, but just Christian culture and regular culture. I don't really see a difference in the sense that there still is a kind of deadline, we gotta hurry up, we gotta get to. So there's still similar themes. There's just the God factor, right? There's the purpose factor. So I think, in general society, it's like, okay, you wanna get married, you wanna be partnered up so that you can feel more part or accepted as a whole part of the society, right? Whereas within the church, it's like, okay, you want to be accepted within the church community, but you want to be accepted by God too, right? And you want to be fulfilled, you want to get closer to heaven. And so there's all of those pieces, I think, that play. So, just really briefly, I don't really see much of a difference except for that purpose-driven marriage type thing.
Actually, I've been to different mosques and masjids, places of prayers and spirituality across the country nationally. And I think, which is very common within places of prayers, is there's certain demographics within age and ethnicity that typically go to certain centers locally. And so I've noticed across the board, typically the difference within America across international masjids is that there's this sense of being American, both for men and women. And so speaking specifically about single women, I think it's a sense of being very individualistic. I think, Islamically speaking, many cultures and communities are very community-based, household-based. It's about a we and us, uplifting together your community. It's very much less about the I, versus I think my perception of what the American Muslim typically battles in their identity is balancing the we and the I. And so I've noticed that there's this shift of how much do I want to be educated, how much do I want to be professionally accomplished, and how much do I want to unite my ummah meaning religion and my community. And so I think it's this great transition that I've been seeing within my generation, that the part aspect of ethnicity being kind of put to the back hold, and it's more about how is this individual educated and how religious are they in terms of their affiliation. And those are my biggest priorities in terms of moving forward with marriage. And so that's something that I think is actually quite beautiful. It's something that I think scares a lot of people within the older generation because they hold on to their traditional values so hard. So I understand that aspect too, but like I said, our generation is quite shifting. And so when I am in these spaces of spirituality and prayer amongst my peers, I think we're quite moving forward. And it's really beautiful to see in terms of what's really the core foundation of what we want and our values being aligned. And I think that the I and the we is this struggle that we're going through. And every individual is kind of moving forward in terms of how much they want to give and take in terms of satisfying themselves, of course, moving on the path of Islam, and then also satisfying their families as a community.
Just a couple thoughts. If you're outside of the faith community, one benefit is that a lot of times the stigma is a lot less. I certainly found among my friends for school and whatnot that it didn't really matter whether or not I was single. They didn't have anxiety about that and about me. So that's comforting and comfortable and really attractive. I think it nudges a lot of people out of faith communities, just that relief of being surrounded by that. Also, though, I think that long-term committed relationships, in whatever form, strengthen society. I think they provide a measure of security and stability that is really useful. I'm not advocating sticking around in abusive situations. I know that it's not for everybody. I don't want to be misinterpreted there, but I think that there's a real strength to that. That a religious community, through marriage and other means, automatically provides. And so finding how that works, if you're outside of that community, can be a lot more difficult. And so that's, I see as kind of the give and take and the trade-offs of whether or not you're single in or out of a religious community.
Yeah, I'm with you. The negatives I think we've listed. A positive is that I have faith, right? My faith is what got me through my difficult dating life and my difficult single years. Belief, prayer, learning, community. I mean, otherwise I would have left. So.
Wow. Taking that in. Okay, so one thing that we actually did in this JOFA journal was we created a list of best practices, because I think when we talk about shame in singlehood and many forms of singlehood, there's a lot of not wanting to ask and not knowing what to say, what to do, and then really, instead of asking, really being obnoxious without even realizing it and really messing up and damaging relationships. And I say there are different categories of people where different people should know different things. Like parents of adult children need to learn that you don't want to sever your relationship with your adult children who happen to not be married. Like, these are some things you may want to think about. If you could say some things that you've either told friends or family that you wish you could have told friends or family or members of the community, if you did X, Y, or Z, we feel more included and you would feel more included in our community, we'd be breaking some of these boundaries down, breaking down some of these walls.
Let's see. That's still going on. So I don't know if it's because I'm still single. So these teachable moments continue to happen. I was in church the other day and was leading worship, leading the service. And after the service, a woman in the church came up to me and was like, "I'm praying for you, a husband, because you're just too pretty." And I was like, now, honestly, I think I would have been more defensive before I had words to put to this, right? Before I had these opportunities to sit on these panels and write it out, and I didn't have anything, to put to it. So I probably would have been more defensive. But this time, I literally held her hand and walked her to her car, and we just had a great conversation, And I was like, "Well, thank you." I wouldn't have said that before I would have snapped. But I was like, "Thanks for praying for me." I joked and said something about Idris Elba. I was like, "Oh, he's taken, but I believe in miracles," and she was just laughing. And then she said, because you don't want to wait too long because, what's your name? It's like, you don't want to wait too long because, you don't want to not need somebody. Not that you need anyone. And I was like, okay, let's talk about that. That's kind of nuanced, right? She knew that, you don't need anyone, but she was so influenced by kind of this dominant thing, culture, that she's kind of going back and forth, But I did say, it's thanks for praying for me, but here's the thing, do you think this is my fault? She's like, no, she's like, it's got to be the right person. And I was like, right. And if it's got to be the right person, then that means that I have to tread carefully, right? And she's like, yeah, but I'm praying for you. I was like, okay, when he comes, you'll be the first one, But it was more of a conversation. So yeah, there's things that I would want to tell other people, but it's more people who are single.
So let's say they're not your congregant, and you could just say what you actually want to say.
Oh, I mean, honestly, even if she wasn't a congregant, I probably would have been a little bit more, probably a little more grace giving. But because people just don't know, they're just ignorant, they just say whatever. One time my uncle said something really smart, no, here, I'll give you another thing. Sorry. Someone came to me and said, oh, happy birthday, you're getting up there, you better hurry up. And I was like, aren't you on divorce number 2? I think I did that to you. And I was like, I did say that. I was like, I feel like you need to be giving me different advice. I really feel like you have something else to share, And he was like, oh, ha, ha, ha. That's my story.
That's a great story. That's a good story. I think one thing that would be really useful is just to let go of control about whether or not somebody's married. I mean, that's the thing about marriage, is that there's no one person that can be held responsible for it and make this decision, right? It's never one person's responsibility. It's always kind of a miracle of two people's timing and volition and where they are, And so when we worry and obsess and treat it like it's something that has to be fixed, I'm sympathetic to the impulse, but really, there's nothing that anybody can do. I remember talking to my dad about some loneliness and some challenges that way, and he said, well, what do we do? And he's like, wants to fix it because he cares about me. And I was like, I don't think you're supposed to be able to fix this. I mean, I can't fix it by myself. You certainly can't fix it, And so I think just that's an uncomfortable place to be, to sit with that ambiguity. But it's a lot more real. I mean, and that, I think, allows for more empathy with people who are single and seeing them as people. Maybe you can think about the things, if people who are married can think about the things that they don't have control over either, and they wish people would just be understanding about.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to definitely echo everything that's been said so far with the different tangents. I think for me, it's really about language and tone. I think often people are projecting their own views on other people, and again, sense of control, as if there's a problem to fix. Often I think young women or women, single women in general, within my community are like, oh, so you finished school, you're working now, so because what's there left to do really in the next chapter for you, supposedly. And I think there's also this tone of not only older people, but even those that just are married. So it's kind of like overnight you've become much more educated than me suddenly for you, and it becomes very condescending in terms of, well, you know, I've gotten married, what about you now? And so it's quite, I try to laugh at it. You can't educate everyone. So I do try to acknowledge their intentions are good for me to some degree, I hope. And so I definitely think in terms of just really being cognizant of your language and your tone, trying to make sure you're asking them how they are versus just telling them, well, you don't seem happy, what is missing in your life, and kind of being like, well, it's my choice to not be married, actually. And so I think just being very cognizant of what kind of intentions you're moving forward in terms of how you're approaching people and asking them in person versus telling them how they should be feeling.
I'm thinking of so many funny stories because it's interesting that I think as we get more comfortable with ourselves, we're able to use humor more. A friend of mine was asked, do you have a family? And he said, yeah, I'm a mom, brother. And like, just, I was asked, hey, how's your social life? It was really good. Like, end of story. That's me at the end, toward like at a later stage of my process. I just want to say, and I'm grateful for humor when I'm able to use it. Advice for communities. Celebrate other things other than marriage and children. We have a family trip. I heard about a synagogue. Let's say it that way. A family trip to Israel. Someone called and said, I'd like to sign up. You know what? Right now it's just for families. That makes no sense, right? They want to go, let them go, right? Have parties for graduations, from the altar, from the bima in the Jewish world, like we want to say mazel tov for, those, like, celebrate other things. That's a huge one. Also, one best practice, when I was 42 and really, like, not dating anyone special, my mother gave me a birthday gift, which has Ecclesiastes on it, and it says there's a time for everything under the sun. And I just thought, you know what, a Jewish mom who's nervous about her daughter getting married, giving a gift like that, that's a good gift. Everything we can say that is sort of like, hey, it's all timing, anything like that, the freedom piece of letting other people actually live their lives. Not saying things like, but don't you want to have children while you're young? Right? Like, those are sort of, seems to us to be self-evident. But I think for communities, I was part of a community on the Upper West Side that I think did this really well. They celebrated a lot of different things. I think that was helpful.
What's really helpful is having married women, on this panel who are having this conversation along with us. I've sat on panels about singleness, right? We've been to some, and it's been couples shelling out, advice and marriage. They weren't talking about singleness at all, and I have felt ostracized on singleness panels. Like, I sat there, I was like, why am I here? This has nothing to do with me, So one form of advice is really for people when they get into relationships, and if I ever again, I want to make sure that, you have to be careful that you haven't arrived. You're like 3 months into your relationship, or, you just got married, and then all of a sudden, like you said, you're on the other side. And then, like, you get amnesia about, whether it was the struggle or about, where you were at. And then they start perpetuating the same. It's like a cycle, because everybody didn't just get married outside of college, necessarily. There are people that, got married maybe a little bit later, whatever later means. And then when they do, I know some people that get married in their 40s, and then all of a sudden it's like, when you get married, it's like, sis, you just got married. Like, you were single for a long time. Right. But they forget. And what I don't want for any one of us to do is to forget, you know, to make sure. I had one friend, coworker of mine, who said to me, and I think it's this when we were talking, you know, she said, if there's a free night of the week and our boss says, you know, hey, what are you doing? Because I worked at a college. She's like, you don't have to raise your hand and volunteer for everything just because you're the single pastor out of the four of us. Like, you don't have to do that. She said, you don't need an excuse to have to do something with your time. You know, she said, you know, I'm married now, so she was like, but I have somebody else helping me with the groceries and do laundry and get the dog and all of that. And that freed me. So I almost looked like cried when she told me that, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm volunteering for everything at, you know, midnight, or I'm feeling like I have to say, oh, well, I'm free, so I guess I have to do it because everyone else has responsibilities and I don't have any. And she was like, no, I empathize with you more because you have to do these things on your own and you don't have a partner to help you. And that was coming from a married woman, and she just blessed me, and I was just so happy. So.
One more thing to add,
One more thing.
Number one, there was a woman that I went to a thing with. We became quite close when we were single. I heard through Facebook that she got engaged. I was so happy for her. I remember that she was a couple years older than me. I said, oh my gosh, I'm so happy. And I really like inspiring stories. I tell everyone my age, my husband's age. I tell them it's important for me to let people know 48, 57. So I said to her, would you mind reminding me how old you are? And she wrote back, well, first I'd like to share with you how I met him and what I did differently. And I just thought, okay, note to self, right? Like you're saying, like now you're an expert on relationships. And as if, I think I heard you say this once, Sharon, as if engagement is like the prize. And now that I have it, I'm gonna be on the other side. Another best practice is for couples, and this I actually have to get on myself, I'm not great at hosting, but I had a couple that had me over whenever I wanted. As I said, I don't love the Sabbath meal, but there was one couple that had quiet meals. It was an open invitation. To me, that was best practice. Mm-hmm. Another couple who would call me before synagogue events and say, can we go with you? Can we sit with you? Right? That walking into an event alone, not so fun. Right? Having people to go with and having friends recognize that I'm on the margins is really important. So those are good practices.
I love that. So Ruthka is collecting note cards if you have any questions to ask our panelists while that's happening. One thing I want to talk about was parenting as a single parent. And in that respect, I think there's definitely something unique to sometimes the gender segregation within the communities, things like that, and how to navigate that. Don't know if you have any insights or what have you.
So I do come from a single parent home. My mom raised all four of us. And so I think without even realizing, I was just always within that space, navigating the social context and within faith-based communities, realizing that not only was she a single parent, but she also had four girls. So there was no sense of malehood within our household at all, as a father figure or as a brother. And so I felt like there was a lot of layers there that kind of put us at a disadvantage. I think our community at that time did the best they could, of course. It's still a very social stigma in terms of that sense that we're navigating. But I saw very much that every accomplishment was just kind of like, oh, you just kind of barely got through. Versus if it was a counterpart within a male-driven home, every same accomplishment was kind of amplified in terms of, wow, that was amazing. And so it's not only, I think, exclusive to being Muslim, but I think just being a woman and being a single woman, there's a lot of ostracization that happens within our community of you just barely got through. And so at every corner being like, you know, just waiting for something to go wrong, just was kind of like, I told you so, for being single or for having, you know, these identities. So it's very unfortunate, but I think as we're moving along within this community and this generation, that narrative is definitely changing a lot. And I think moving forward, that's something I'm very cognizant of, whether if and when I choose to get married, how am I going to lead my household in that sense, both as a woman, as a Muslim, and having children in that space, how will I raise them? Because I think to this day, because our basic principle of growing up in my household was our religion and education and self-identity, that there was never any pressure in terms of marriage or relying on a man. And so because of that, I think my mentality is quite different than if it was someone in a different household, of course.
There's a lot of questions, but do you want to answer this one?
I guess I'll just say that I think it's, so the LDS Church found themselves is a nice way of putting it, fighting the ERA years ago, the Equal Rights Amendment, and there have been leaders that have said a number of things really discouraging women from working outside the home, which of course really isn't an option if you're a single parent. And so that narrative is changing, but it takes time, and it's something that I still find, although I'm married, a lot of anxiety going into, I'm going to have my first child, and I'm starting a new job, and so I kind of wonder how that will affect people's perceptions of my commitment. And the main thing I have to say about that is hats off to single parents. That's a huge thing. And when I have held jobs and not been a parent, I've always been so inspired by people that make it work.
I should say, we had a panel a couple months ago with Tayyaba with different women in the Orthodox community who, there was one woman who decided to freeze her eggs, one woman who chose to adopt, one woman who did IUF and IVF and just shared their experiences. And there's an audio recording, and I don't think there's ever been a panel like that, so it's worth checking out. Okay. So many things to say, but I'm going to stick with the questions. Do you think that tailored dating apps like J-Swipe and Tinder make the issue of shame as a single person even worse? Like, what is the effect of all the dating apps?
So I'm still navigating that kind of space, being single. And I know many of my friends, and I've occasionally kind of looked at that as a space. I think when you're working 9 to 5, when you're living with family or you have friends, there's so many different factors you're balancing, and so it is very hard to meet people around your age or demographics of being accomplished and also having a sense of spirituality. I think personally for women, the dialogue that I've seen going on is regaining a sense of agency for them and control within the space. It's not necessarily, my parents suggested someone to me, whether it's arranged as a blind date through a friend or a coworker, but it's I'm putting myself out in the space and I can now be as picky as I want to. Whether that's something on paper or whether this conversation is something that I want to choose. And I'm sure there's a lot of cons to it too. I'm naturally within this generation of what can happen on dating apps, but I think generally speaking, even having those outlets for both men and women being single within the Muslim community, because dating is not something very openly talked about within this generation, it's really great because it lets them take that control back and again, be as picky as they want to or really just know what they're looking for versus being told where to go, what to do, truthfully speaking, being arranged in that sense.
I met my husband on a dating app, and as a person of faith, I really believe that it was like a letter to God. Just saying, this is who I am, this is what I'm looking for. It helped me get very clear about certain things. So I know that there's an aspect of it that makes it candy store-like, and I know that that's a problem, but also as Tayyaba said, that it adds a level of focus and it takes away the panic in my mind.
I have a lot of questions. Okay, we're going to make this like fast round because I'm sure they're all great questions. We've been talking a lot about people who are single in their 20s and 30s. This question is about what about people who become single again, who get married, get divorced. Anything to say to that?
Same rules apply. Same rules apply. The community just needs to treat them
like treat people like people?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this singleness group, people have a tendency to think, oh, single, so that means in your 20s or in your late teens. So it's always like,
Not married yet.
not married yet, and that's it. But singleness falls under so many spectrums, and you mentioned single parents, widowed, divorced. That all falls under singleness. And I think if we start seeing it that way, as opposed to the singles versus the marrieds, and then, oh well, you're divorced, or oh well, you're a widow. Then I think we'll start to take singleness a little bit more seriously in all of its different complexities.
Okay, this is for Dr. Harris and Ms. Bukhari. What are your thoughts on the stigma on premarital relationships, which are very strong in both the Muslim and Mormon communities, which in turn puts pressure on people within to marry early?
So I'm wondering, particularly like premarital sexual relationships.
I think we're talking about some sort of physical intimacy,
Right.
maybe.
It's a real issue, right? Because in order to be faithful Mormon, you're supposed to be abstinent prior to marriage. The older you get, the more I think that's difficult psychologically, and also in practice. And so yeah, it kind of puts people in a position where they want to mature, they're looking to mature, but then there's this element that I think that the sexual aspect of marriage is actually one of the things that causes people to look at it as the benchmark of adulthood. And so there's this sanctioned place for adulting in marriage with that particular element. And that's a tricky thing to figure out. That's a tricky thing to figure out how to date as a mature person without having those experiences, or with having those experiences and compromising the standards of your religion. I mean, I don't have, the best thing I can do is acknowledge that it's a real thing, and then hope that communities would be more understanding. I mean, I think that amid so many of the leadership in the LDS community who married young, and they really don't know what it's like to try and go abstinent for many years. They just don't know. And that's something that I think there's a space there for a lot more compassion and understanding and figuring that out.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, religiously speaking, getting married young is quite admired also, not only to gain closeness to your spirituality, but to also prevent promiscuous behavior before marriage. And so I do think that this topic is not talked about openly enough for however many reasons there are, but I think navigating that relationship, whether you're single or in a relationship before marriage, that's really something on an individual level someone has to struggle with, depending on how religious or close to their spirituality they feel. And so, again, I don't have, I guess, a real answer to that, but I think that's definitely something a lot of young people, young again, however you want to define that, but that they struggle with in terms of I want to stay close to my religion and I want to be pure and intent with that as to what is expected, to definitely have abstinence before marriage, but it's this natural hormone and growing older, so it's this struggle that I think that many individuals have and they struggle with, but I don't think attaining marriage is the key to that. Kind of to that behavior. And I know some individuals have that mentality where let me just get married because then I can do X, Y, and Z, but versus let me get married for the right reason. So that's something that I think should be talked about openly enough, and that's something that we're still shifting through.
Thank you. What does an ideal society or community look like when it fully includes non-traditional families? What aspects of their lives should we be most sensitive to? So I would even say one thing that comes up often, that came up often, and at least I spent a year having conversations on this topic, was should we be segregated or should we be like should you have singles events? Should you have LGBTQ day at your synagogue? Like what is the ideal? Is intergenerational, different types of moms and family? Like what's the best way, or is there a best way?
So I've seen this lived out once in my life. So there's this scripture where Jesus is in the temple and he's teaching, and his disciples come and they're like, your mother and your brothers are outside, and he's like, who are my mother and my brothers, right? He's like, the ones that do the will of God. Like, I don't need to go outside. That's not priority. You all are priority, right? And I always use that as a basis for a lot of my teaching around this topic, because I'm like, here, it's like Jesus revolutionized family, right? Where it was like, who is my wife, husband, sister, brother? Like, we're all a part of this. And so I've seen that lived out. My boss in California and his family, used to always just invite me over, and I'd just be like, I don't want to feel like the third wheel or feel like that. But, we have gotten so close over the past 4 or 5 years where it's like, I fly to California now, and I'm at graduation events, I'm at, basketball games with little son, I'm at graduation and, all of those celebrations, and it's nothing. I never feel like the single person. I don't even feel like the Black person, because I am the only one, right? So but when I'm with them, I don't feel anything. It's the weird, it's weird, because if I was a part of another family, there's instances where I have felt that way, right? I've met the mom and the grandmother and the great grandmother, and I love the dog, and and we're just one family when I'm around, and it's like when there's dinner tape, extra plate, I say all that to say that is traditional, but it's non-traditional in the sense where I've spent so much time with them that I am a part of that family. It's not about a single event or a single person. It's like, we're just going to the movies and you're just a part of us. And I would like to see that a lot more in communities, faith communities, but I'd like to just see it more organically, just in life, like you were saying, we're just people are like, hey, come on over. Hey, let's do this together. But it's not like you're asking your single friend. That's my friend, that's my family, Yeah,
I remember when I was teaching middle school, we had an event when we were at a theme park. And this may sound so dorky, but I had a couple of students who said, hey, Ms. Harris, come ride the ride with us. And I mean, on the one hand, carnival rides, whatever, but on the other hand, I was so flattered that they wanted me to join them, right? I did that all the time. But there's something really flattering about somebody who's not in your peer group wanting you around, right? And so I think there's something to that. I think it would look something like not being threatened by the differences and just actually finding it to be enriching.
Great answers.
So this next question, I'm actually going to broaden the question, but the question is, what are your thoughts on apologies for him, but the situation, I would say, surrounding how we treat singles at weddings. Rather than merely celebrating the couple, we go Eve. But I mean, we get the gist, right? I would say I think weddings universally can be a challenging time for so many reasons. But if there's anything also specific to your faith community, I think Passover is a tough round in the Jew world. I don't know if there's also a certain holiday or ritual or something that you want to share as well. So I would say not so just the wedding thing, but also if there's anything else in particular.
I was pretty open by the end of my single time that I wanted to find a partner. And there were brides who would include me in the prayers during the wedding canopy. And I found that to be really beautiful. But when I got married, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to assume, hey, right? And there's also this concept of drinking the wine that the bride and groom have had. I would always want to drink it. But I don't want to be the one to say, come drink this wine, right? You need to have a sip of this blessed wine, because that feels really bad. So I think that was interesting at my own wedding, right? I also think there was a sense, I don't know, but what I did, my bridal shower was me going around and we played a game where I had to explain, I had to guess what experience, you said an experience, and I had to guess, that happened with you. It was not about us, the couple. It was about my friendships. I think that's not a Jewish thing. That's just a life thing. and also kind of allowing so like people don't come, right? Like this is not a command performance. I'm having this event, you can come, you don't have to come for an hour, right? Because when I was single, like the thought of sitting through 6 hours of a wedding was like, honestly, like even now, I mean, just so painful. So that was it was helpful for me when I was single to know that there were rituals around getting the next person married. And I liked being part of those rituals sometimes, but not all the time. And I didn't want to assume that people wanted to be part of the rituals. I did have a prayer list under my wedding canopy, but it was only for people that I knew were in the middle of wanting this. Because also we know that we go through phases. There were periods of time where I was just marinating and I was like, I really don't want that. So not to assume that all my guests who were single wanted to,
There is no way around wedding season. Everybody is not going to have that mentality. I hate to be like, you're just going to have to resort to, because a lot of them, unfortunately, are going to come off a little pretentious, or a little like exclusive. And people are happy and they're celebrating and they want to kind of be involved in everything. It's really about more how you like kind of prepare yourself before you go, When I was in my 20s, every wedding I went to, I was miserable. In my 30s, I love weddings, I don't know why, I guess I've grown. But I was miserable because, one, I was going through a breakup, so that was like, oh, I cried through that whole thing, And then, other ones, it was like, I felt like people were looking at me. I felt more pressure around my singleness in my 20s, actually, than I do in my 30s. Even though there's the comments happen, but when you turn 30, you're just like, who cares? Say what you want, right? I'm still alive, so anyway, so all that to say is really kind of like how you prepare yourself before you go. And then if you have friends that are so great, I have some really great friends now. We're getting married in their 30s, and they're just like, they have like all the single ladies. You don't want to hear that song, do you? I'm like, I don't hear. They're including that. They're not necessarily doing the whole, toss. But at the same time, there are going to be weddings that you go to where it is going to be tough to get through. If you're not always going to have a +1 with you, financially, everybody can't handle that. I just got invited to a wedding and I texted the guy and was like, so I don't get a +1, I know he can't afford it. So hopefully he's not watching.
Okay, so I have 2 final questions. I'm going to ask them, and if you have something to say, great, not, yeah. Okay. Does your faith community have the idea of Kharit being cut off from the congregation if you are a man or woman who is childless? So that's one question. Kharit, it's like forever excommunication.
It's just a little thing.
It's a great Jewish thing. There are a lot of things that religious communities could not do or stop doing to better prepare women for unmarried adulthood. But what can religious communities start doing to prepare and empower young women and girls as they move toward adulthood, perhaps without marriage as their #1 priority?
Don't give my mother, when she would turn 13, she was given a bride's Bible. So that happened back in the day. Right, like it's not all about being a bride. #1.
Yeah, I'll take on the second question. I think what we can do better as a community and within our households is to have more conversations, talk about careers, talk about education, talk about hobbies, personal skill sets, not put a focus on your value as a woman to get married, and really leveraging your other assets. And I think talking about, financial capacity, talking about emotional health and mental intelligence, and really the other parts of your character and layers to you as a person, not putting a value on you in terms of a ring on you. And again, holding healing circles, holding spaces of dialogue within your faith-based communities, bringing both women that are married and single, both demographics and age, and talking about how to be an empowered woman. What does that look like? Defining empowerment. that's something, a space that I work in a lot professionally speaking, and it's something that also I'm very personally motivated by, working within the Muslim community. And so really letting a girl and a woman at any age know that her value does not come from a man or a marriage or any relationship she puts forward, but the relationship she has with herself and her God. I think just really uplifting other topics in her life and shedding light on the fact that whether she chooses to get married, that does not define her, but how she upholds herself and loves herself, that's really the most important relationship she'll ever have.
Beautifully said.
So the first question, I'm not familiar with how it works in the Jewish faith, but the LDS faith says that you need to be sealed together. So a marriage is also a sealing in order to transcend not just this life, but into the next life, right? And when this was first a thing in Mormonism, it wasn't just sealing marriages. People sealed their friends, they sealed to the prophet. They were trying to create this sealed network that would extend beyond this life. And the way that has been practiced now has become a lot more standardized and more restricted. But I think that that sort of grand vision is really beautiful in a lot of ways, that we could be sealed to each other, and it doesn't have to look like marriage. We can have these eternal bonds as friends, or cousins, or whatever the relationship is, right? So, and I think we need that. Like I think everybody wants that, regardless of the marital status. To the second question, so a lot of lessons to the young women focus on chastity and focus on marriage traditionally. That is changing some in the LDS community. As far as I can tell, about 35% of LDS women will not get married before they end their childbearing years. And so, I mean, they might get married eventually, but let's say to like age 35 to 45 or so, about 35% will not. And that's so much higher than a lot of the LDS community realizes. They just don't realize how many are in that situation, in part because they don't interact with them because they're often these singles congregations, singles boards. So I think if we could have leaders, youth leaders, when they're teaching these lessons about family, that's such a big deal in the religion, and I think it's important, I'm not trying to minimize it, but to look around, and when you've got 3 young women in a row, one of them, statistically, will not have that opportunity. And so we need to treat that as the commonality that it is, and talk about lots of other options for education and work and fulfillment and service, etc., that aren't dependent on marital status. It's just huge. Like start that from the very beginning.
I have one more thing. No, we're done?
Would I ever say no to you?
Okay, I'll just say one thing, which is that I'm not going to be able to have children. I'm a teacher. I have a lot of legacy, and I've been a rabbi to families that did have children, and the children were estranged. The children were all sorts of other things, right? So there's no perfect here, and the world is overpopulated. The Jewish community needs more children. So like there's always these double messages, right? And so this is God's will for me, and I really have to say, at least in the Jewish teaching, plant a tree, have a child, teach a child, right? There are so many ways to leave a mark on this world and have a purpose. And I really have peace with that. That was a gift. That's grace. That I have peace around that, but I wish I could share that with others because I know it's a painful topic.
Wow. Thank you again to all of our incredible panelists. I'm going to also share just a closing thought or two. So one thing that you were saying, I had this talk that I told you about in the beginning, and I had 2 goals. Like, if I can walk away with 2 points that everyone in the room walked away with. One is that people who are single are people, and they should be treated as such. And it's such a simple, obvious, I think, should be message, but it's just that not all single people are the same, not all women are the same, not all men are all the same. that there is no single answer about how to treat a specific large segment of our community. We're all individuals with wants, needs, and what have you. So, but just on a very common level, treat people like people. And then what I discovered with the year where we went to different, we sort of interacted with different age brackets, and the commonality, no matter the age bracket, no matter the sex, no matter whatever, was that I said, why are you here? And so they just want to be treated like a person. It's not like that was the number one thing, and it had nothing to do with anything. Like I'm an Orthodox feminist. There's a lot of that I'm up against. This is not controversial. Treating people decently. Okay, so that's number one. And then number two, and I wonder if you may or may not disagree with me, but what I said is that marriage is not a goal. It's not a goal. It's not a degree. It's not there's only. You can't control it, or sometimes you can control it, but like it's not like you could say, well, in 1 year from now I'm going to do this. And there was actually one point in the conference that I was at where this woman stood up and talked about how she decided she was going to get married, and she put on lipstick, and obviously I was dying, but also I was on the panel, so I got to speak about that. But marriage is not a goal, and I think that if we sort of have that sort of mindset that it's not like a failure to not get married, there's different things that we do in life and that we don't do in life, and not everyone would just try apple, and I don't know, like we all find our gifts and our paths and our strengths and our weaknesses, and we run with it. This was an incredible panel, and I learned so much, and I hope that people do stay, and we will continue the conversation, and we continue to be supportive of each other. I also want to thank Rivka, our program manager, who did an incredible job in making
I just want to say thank you again. Thank you everyone for coming and making this happen. Thank you, Sharon, for moderating this panel. Thank you to all of our panelists. You were incredible. It has been amazing to work with you leading up to this, and it has also just been such a pleasure to hear this whole conversation, and it's very, very inspiring and so important for all of us to hear and to be part of this conversation, and I feel very privileged to have been part of it. So thank you, everyone. Please mingle and talk to each other, keep the conversation going, bring it back with you. We also have a journalist here if anyone wants to
Totally anonymous.
or not. If anyone wants to anonymously or not talk to her, be part of the article about it, that would be great. Please stick around.
Singles.
And yeah, thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause.
I'm listening to you. Oh my God. I really want to talk to you about it.